Good morning, everyone. Brett Kavanaugh speaking from my chambers on what's turning out to be the most tense morning in Washington since Trump left office 4 years ago. So I'm sitting here with my coffee, stronger than usual because I've been up most of the night, staring at documents that landed on my desk yesterday. Documents that detail something I never thought I'd see, a sitting government's preparation for what they're calling institutional resistance to an incoming elected president. And folks, what I'm about to tell you isn't speculation or political commentary. This is based on classified briefings, off-the-record conversations with intelligence officials, and Supreme Court documents that reveal exactly how the permanent bureaucracy is preparing for Trump's return to power. The deep state isn't just resisting Trump this time, they're preparing for war. The emergency meeting. It started 3 days ago when I got an urgent call to attend what they called an extraordinary judicial briefing at the Justice Department. Nothing on my official calendar, no public record, just a request for my immediate presence on a matter of national security. I arrive at Justice to find myself in a room with the other conservative justices, the Attorney General, FBI Director, and several people I don't recognize but who clearly have very high security clearances. Gentlemen, the Attorney General begins, we need to discuss the constitutional implications of the upcoming transition. There are complications that may require judicial intervention. What follows is the most disturbing briefing I've ever received as a Supreme Court justice. They're not just preparing for a normal presidential transition, they're preparing for what one official calls an unprecedented challenge to institutional continuity. The intelligence assessment. One of the unidentified officials, let's call him Mr. Smith, pulls out a classified assessment that he says was prepared jointly by CIA, FBI, NSA, and DHS. Mr. Justice, he says, addressing me directly, the incoming administration poses what we assess to be an existential threat to national security infrastructure. The document he shows me outlines what they call risk factors associated with Trump's return. Intention to dismiss career intelligence officials, plans to declassify sensitive operational information, proposed elimination of security clearances for opposition figures, stated goal of restructuring intelligence community. But here's what really gets my attention. They're not just assessing Trump as a political threat, they're categorizing him as a national security threat equivalent to foreign adversaries. The assessment, Mr. Smith continues, concludes that normal transition protocols may be insufficient to protect vital national interests. The resistance framework. The Attorney General then lays out what they're calling constitutional safeguards for the transition period, but as he's talking, I realize these aren't safeguards, they're obstacles. They've identified key areas where career bureaucrats can resist or delay Trump's directives. Intelligence operations that can be classified above his clearance level, ongoing investigations that can be protected from interference, judicial proceedings that can be expedited or delayed as needed. We have legal mechanisms, the AG explains, to ensure institutional continuity regardless of political transitions. But the most disturbing part is when he starts talking about what he calls emergency protocols, procedures they've developed for dealing with what they term unconstitutional executive actions. If the incoming administration attempts to exceed constitutional authority, he says, we have frameworks in place to ensure institutional resistance. The Supreme Court's role. Then they get to why I'm really there. They want the Supreme Court to pre-approve what they're calling expedited judicial review for Trump administration actions. We anticipate, Mr. Smith explains, that the incoming administration will challenge existing national security protocols through executive orders. We need assurance that constitutional challenges to those orders will receive immediate judicial attention. They're asking us to essentially prejudge Trump's actions before he even takes office, to have legal frameworks ready to block whatever he might try to do. But here's what really bothers me. They're not asking all the justices. They're only briefing the ones they consider institutionally reliable. The liberal justices weren't invited to this meeting. The assassination intelligence. Then Mr. Smith drops something that makes my blood run cold. He shows me a classified report about the assassination attempt on Trump during the campaign. Mr. Justice, he says, there are aspects of that incident that weren't made public, aspects that relate to our current security concerns. The report details intelligence that was known before the attempt, intelligence about security vulnerabilities that weren't addressed, communication failures that seemed too systematic to be accidental, and response protocols that weren't followed. The concerning element, Mr. Smith continues, is that some of the security failures appear to have been institutional rather than operational. He's telling me that elements within the government may have facilitated the assassination attempt through deliberate security negligence. This is why, he concludes, we cannot assume normal security protocols will be sufficient for the transition period. The Constitutional Crisis Plan. The Attorney General then outlines what they're calling constitutional crisis protocols, basically plans for how to handle what they see as Trump's inevitable attempts to exceed presidential authority. They've war-gamed scenarios where Trump tries to fire intelligence officials, declassify sensitive operations, or investigate the investigators. For each scenario, they have legal and institutional responses prepared. If he attempts to weaponize the Justice Department against his political enemies, the AG explains, career prosecutors have authority to resist through existing legal frameworks. If he tries to expose ongoing intelligence operations, career officials have classification authorities that transcend presidential directives. If he attempts to investigate members of the previous administration, we have attorney-client privilege and executive privilege protections already in place. They've essentially created a shadow legal framework designed to neutralize presidential authority, the January timeline. Mr. Smith then shows me a timeline that really disturbs me. They're not just planning for after Trump takes office, they're planning for the transition period itself. January 6th through January 20th, he says, represents a critical vulnerability period. We assess high probability of constitutional crisis during this window. They expect Trump to attempt what they call preemptive strikes against the intelligence community between winning the election and taking office, and they're prepared to respond. We have legal authorities, Mr. Smith explains, to protect ongoing operations and personnel regardless of political transitions. But when I ask what specific authorities they're referring to, the answers are vague and heavily classified. The intelligence community revolt. After the official briefing ends, one of the FBI officials asks to speak with me privately. What he tells me is even more disturbing than the formal presentation. Justice Kavanaugh, he says, what you heard in there is the sanitized version. The reality is that the intelligence community is in open revolt against the incoming administration. He explains that career intelligence officials view Trump's return as an existential threat to their operations, their methods, and their institutional survival. They're not just planning to resist, he tells me. They're planning to actively undermine any attempts to reform or investigate intelligence operations. He gives me specific examples. Ongoing investigations that will be protected from presidential interference, classified operations that will be elevated above presidential clearance levels, and intelligence sharing with foreign agencies that will continue regardless of administration policy. The president may be the constitutional head of the executive branch, he says, but the intelligence community has developed institutional independence that transcends electoral politics. The media coordination. The FBI official then explains something that really opens my eyes, how the intelligence community coordinates with media to shape public perception of political threats. When Trump tries to fire intelligence officials or expose classified operations, he explains, there will be immediate leaks to trusted journalists about the chaos and dangerous decision-making in the White House. These leaks will be designed to create public pressure for congressional intervention or judicial oversight. He shows me examples from Trump's first term where intelligence leaks were specifically timed to coincide with major policy announcements, creating media firestorms that derailed presidential initiatives. It's not just reactive, he notes. It's a coordinated strategy to maintain institutional control regardless of electoral outcomes. The congressional component. The FBI official also explains how Congress fits into the resistance framework. Key members of both parties, he says, have been briefed on what they call institutional preservation protocols. These are basically frameworks for congressional intervention if Trump attempts to reform intelligence agencies or investigate previous administrations. The Gang of Eight, congressional leaders with intelligence oversight, has been given special briefings on the constitutional necessity of protecting intelligence operations from political interference. But here's what really bothers me. These briefings frame Trump's constitutional authority as president as political interference with legitimate government operations. They're essentially arguing that the intelligence community has constitutional authority that supersedes presidential authority. My constitutional concerns. As I'm listening to all this, I'm realizing we're facing the biggest constitutional crisis since the Civil War. We have unelected government officials claiming authority to resist the elected president based on their own assessment of constitutional necessity. The Constitution gives the president executive authority over the federal bureaucracy. But the permanent bureaucracy has developed institutional mechanisms to resist that authority. This isn't about Trump specifically, though his return has crystallized the conflict. This is about whether elected officials have real authority over the permanent government. Can I ask you something directly? I say to the FBI official. Are you telling me that intelligence agencies consider themselves independent of presidential authority? His answer chills me. I'm telling you that some operations and some officials are considered too vital to national security to be subject to political oversight. That's not constitutional government. That's oligarchy. The private conversation. Later that evening, I'm having dinner with a friend who's been in Washington intelligence circles for 30 years, someone I trust completely. I tell him about the briefing, and his reaction surprises me. Brett, he says, what they told you today is the tip of the iceberg. The intelligence community has been planning for Trump's return since the day he left office. He explains that career intelligence officials view the Trump presidency as an aberration that threatened institutional stability. They're not going to let it happen again, he says. But how can they prevent it, I ask. He was elected by the American people. They can't prevent his inauguration, my friend replies, but they can prevent him from actually governing. He outlines a strategy that's already in motion: classify everything important above presidential clearance, protect key personnel through legal frameworks, maintain operations through foreign intelligence partnerships, and use media leaks to create constant crisis management. The goal, he explains, is to ensure that Trump's second term is spent fighting institutional resistance rather than implementing policy. The Supreme Court's dilemma. This puts the Supreme Court in an impossible position. We're being asked to legitimize institutional resistance to constitutional authority. The cases they want us to expedite are designed to neuter presidential power. The emergency protocols they want us to approve would essentially create a parallel government structure answerable to career bureaucrats rather than elected officials. But if we don't cooperate, they've made it clear that institutional resistance will proceed anyway. They're not asking for our permission, they're asking for our cover. Justice Kavanaugh, the Attorney General, said before I left, institutional stability requires institutional continuity. The court's role is to ensure that temporary political disruptions don't damage permanent institutional structures. He's asking us to prioritize bureaucratic interests over constitutional governance. The real timeline, based on everything I've learned, here's what I expect to happen between now and January 20th. December, ongoing operations will be elevated to higher classification levels, putting them beyond Trump's immediate reach. January 1st to 6th, key intelligence personnel will be transferred to positions that make them difficult to fire without complex legal processes. January 6th to 20, major leaks to media about chaos in transition planning and dangerous personnel choices by Trump team. January 20th, Trump takes office with limited actual authority over intelligence operations. January 21 and beyond, constant constitutional battles over presidential authority versus institutional independence. The foreign dimension. My friend also explained something that really disturbs me. How foreign intelligence agencies are being used to maintain operations beyond presidential control. Intelligence sharing agreements with allied countries, he explains, can be used to continue operations even if the president orders them stopped. If Trump tries to shut down surveillance programs, they can be maintained through Five Eyes partnerships with Britain, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. If he tries to stop intelligence cooperation with certain countries, career officials can maintain those relationships through informal channels. This means that foreign intelligence agencies may have more influence over American intelligence operations than the American president. The deep state's evolution. What I'm seeing isn't the same deep state resistance that Trump faced in his first term. That was mostly bureaucratic foot-dragging and strategic leaks. This is systematic preparation for institutional warfare against presidential authority. They've learned from Trump's first term and developed more sophisticated methods of resistance, legal frameworks that protect bureaucratic independence, classification systems that limit presidential oversight, media relationships that shape public perception, and congressional alliances that provide political cover. They're not just resisting Trump, my friend explains. They're creating a permanent system of bureaucratic independence that will outlast Trump and constrain future presidents. What this means for democracy. The implications of what I've learned are staggering. If unelected officials can successfully resist elected authority, then elections don't really matter. Voters can change the faces at the top, but they can't change the fundamental direction of government because that direction is controlled by permanent bureaucrats who view themselves as guardians of institutional continuity. This isn't just about Trump or about conservative versus liberal politics. This is about whether America will remain a constitutional republic where elected officials have real authority or become an administrative state where bureaucrats have effective sovereignty. The constitutional question. As a Supreme Court justice, I'm sworn to uphold the Constitution. But the Constitution assumes that elected officials will have authority over the federal bureaucracy. If that assumption is no longer valid, if career bureaucrats can successfully resist presidential authority through institutional mechanisms, then we need to acknowledge that the constitutional system has fundamentally changed. The question is whether that change serves American interests or bureaucratic interests. Looking ahead, I can't predict exactly how this will play out, but I can tell you this. The next few months will determine whether America remains a constitutional republic or becomes something else entirely. The deep state isn't just resisting Trump, they're defending a system of government that prioritizes institutional continuity over electoral accountability. And they're asking the Supreme Court to legitimize that system by treating bureaucratic resistance as constitutional necessity. I don't know how this ends, but I know it's the most important constitutional crisis of our lifetime. The choice ahead, every American needs to understand what's happening here. This isn't about partisan politics or personal opinions about Trump. This is about whether you believe that elected officials should have authority over the federal government or whether you believe that career bureaucrats should have independence from electoral oversight. The deep state has made their choice. They're betting that institutional resistance can outlast electoral mandates. The question is what choice the American people will make when they understand what's really happening in their government. Thanks for listening, folks. This was one of the most difficult conversations I've ever had to have because it reveals how far our system has drifted from constitutional governance. Next week, we'll talk about what constitutional remedies might be available for restoring electoral accountability over the permanent bureaucracy. Until then, pay attention to what happens in Washington over the next few weeks, because what you're seeing isn't normal political transition, it's constitutional warfare.